All right, I'm going to get out the way, and Liam Gasp is going to talk.
Hi guys, my name is Liam, and my name is also Gasp, and I started painting probably when I was like 14 years old, and we'll skip the whole first part of that because I don't think that was it's kind of interesting, but it wasn't until a lot later until I kind of felt like I was part of the actual culture of it. And this is a recent piece that I did that's just down the road there with a friend of mine, Mac, and he did the flowers and I did the text and the scenery there. And yeah, I thought I'd just put that there because we're in Avondale, and it's kind of like a welcome to Avondale to anyone who hasn't been here before. And we'll get started. So a lot, like myself, a lot of people who have become immersed in the graffiti culture came upon it from watching either Star Wars documentary or Subway Art, which was the book version of the movie. And that was in 1983, and it got screened on TV here in New Zealand. And next thing you know, every kid was taking a marker and on the neighbour's fence or whatever. But it was actually the birth of the culture that has become a worldwide thing. If it wasn't for, was it Henry Chaffin and Martha Cooper putting this together, there wouldn't have been the culture that we have today nearly as significant as it is that we know. So that's sort of how a lot of people came across it, and I guess just high school and running into kids that are doing graffiti at that age, which was kind of has a bit of a jump from that culture. In New Zealand we had which was straight letter graffiti, and you've probably seen it. That was like a culture of its own that didn't really emulate that. It was more of a LA gang thing, but with more of a sort of a Kiwi his own New Zealand's own sort of style in it. Anyway, I took the more sort of subway approach to it, and we had our sort of playground was along the train lines, the train corridors, and at the stations and stuff. And this is Mount Enon train station, probably about just before 2000, and that's a bit of history, as in that it doesn't exist anymore. None of those spaces exist anymore as places that you can paint. And this wall, to myself and a lot of other people, was a sort of a pinnacle of a sort of a wall that if you had your piece up there, it meant your style was worthy enough to surpass some older generation writers and stop them from going over it if it wasn't good enough, because there was limited space on the wall, as there is in Avondale, that it would just be gone over with something that had a bit more of a superior sort of a style or approach.
But I don't think the Avondale wall has that principle. No.
Well, not as much so, but kind of still sort of follows a sort of principle like that, where some quality stuff would get lesser quality things on it, and which pays way for newer pieces for other people to go over stuff that they wouldn't usually go over unless it had been capped or whatever. And these are some more pictures, thanks to Jilski, who's been a supporter of the scene and taking photos for years. I just pulled these off her Instagram, but this is Mount Eden train station, and this is what we called combat zone, and it's just a tunnel down there, and that's another couple of spots that are close by, and that was kind of like our sort of graffiti playland where you could go there on a Sunday where no trains were running, and you could paint pretty much without a worry, but you know, there was still a chance at night of getting arrested or whatever, but it was sort of pretty much a free-for-all. You didn't really have to worry, which is something that we don't really have anymore. A lot of spaces like that in the city, which, you know, for a young idealistic sort of kid that's trying to create something is a perfect sort of a space, because you feel like you're doing something in a public space that's other kids can see, and it's part of the sort of that area that creates that culture. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think there would have been as much that existed. And then later on, we had the Hip Hop Summit, which was Disrupt the System, which for me, for myself, was a way to meet like different writers from around the country that I'd seen their work, but hadn't, or heard of them, but hadn't had a chance to meet them yet. And there's a bunch of my friends and I all there in front of the wall, and Askew, who put together this event, also brought over international writers, which was really exciting for us at the time, and gave us a sense of a bigger community that we were part of, that we didn't really have much of a sense of that before that. And it was pretty exciting for us to meet writers from overseas. And this is a piece I painted there next to a guy, Erok, who's from the States. And yeah, there was, how many of them were there? There was quite a few different disruptive systems.
Was that different years? Okay.
Different years. It went on for about 4 or 5 years, yeah. And this is an example of some legal spaces that we had in Auckland before the, I should mention that the train lines had been buffed when the Rugby World Cup came. They buffed most of the graffiti in the city, and it's never really been the same since. These were some spaces that existed before that, and you were pretty much allowed to paint there without any, like, it was a permission spot. And I feel like Avondale is like, relates to these sort of spaces, whereas it's somewhere you're allowed to paint and you're not going to get in trouble. And these are other examples. This is Oriental Markets, which was empty market space. They turned it into car parks, and it just became graphed out, the whole thing. It was pretty amazing for us at the time that there was an abandoned huge warehouse in the middle of the city that we could all go and paint. And this is up on Simon Street. It was nicknamed Condom Alley because that was where a lot of the working people went to do their business. And so you didn't want to get too close to the ground when you're painting the bottom part of your piece. But yeah, those are 2 spots in Auckland that were permission. And here's examples of spaces overseas that have been the same kind of a space and legitimized as that kind of a space that is in the community. This place up here is 5 Points that was mentioned before, and I'm not actually sure where this is, but it's a good photo that I thought would make a good example. And This is one of my more recent pieces. I skipped a whole lot of years because I didn't want to go through all of that. This is an example of a style sort of like I'm trying to blend. This is more graffiti, but it's still got some elements of it, of sort of pop art and the letter formations and having fun with the sort of funk and flow of the letters, sort of like, you know, you could even say like letters could be dancing or like
Pretty disco.
yeah, or like space or whatever, sort of based on comic art or something. There's another one of my pieces. Yeah, that's kind of more of a reference from another sort of comic art, which was Cheech Wizard, which is a sort of character that's been rehashed a lot of times throughout graffiti. And that's at both those pieces at Avondale Wall, so that's why the significance. That's another piece that I did that's more sort of leaning towards the letter formations that you find in sign painting and sort of trying to blend the two together with graffiti. I'm sure I've missed a whole lot of points here, but I guess that, you know, like some of the points is that the idea of graffiti is like an affirmation of the individual. It's like giving somebody a sense of self as well as giving the community a sense of community. Seeing art in your community makes it feel more like a community. And I think having a space to create that sort of artwork is definitely a positive thing. This is another piece that's a bit blown out there, but that's more leaning towards sort of breaking and blurring the lines between graffiti art and art, whereas you can't really make the difference between whether it's letters or pictures or just everything sort of mashed up together. This is more, even though it's used graffiti tools to make it, it's still, I've used like a lot of sign painting, and then this is part of a solo show I did a few years ago, and a wall piece that I did inside of a gallery. It also sort of represents to me that strengthening the art form and the culture of it through gallery shows that are related to graffiti but not directly actually strengthens the whole culture, as they can't say that's just tagging, we need to wipe it out. There's blurred lines between art and the culture of graffiti, and for me, you know, having it on both sides of the wall makes it more of a stronger culture all in all. And that's sort of a similar sort of approach but done outdoors. And this is a piece that me and Ross had done in New Plymouth a few years back, and that's sort of another topic of graffiti art festivals and how that creates a different sort of perception to the general public, and it's generally a pretty positive perception that you get back from the public, which is a really good thing in strengthening the culture all in all as well. Like, and it gives us a really good opportunity to go and paint big walls and achieve things that we wouldn't normally be able to do out of our own pocket. That's another wall from New Plymouth. This is a wall that's from one of my recent trips over to Melbourne, it's cool to sort of put that sort of stuff in a area like Fitzroy in Melbourne, which is covered in graffiti everywhere, and it's got a lot of walls that are accessible for artists to sort of just, it feels pretty legal to just go and rock up to any wall around there and paint it, because no one will bat an eye. This is quite a recent piece from a festival, Graffiti Art Festival in Palmerston North, and that's in a lane called Berryman's Lane, and this is more leaning towards the sort of street art rather than graffiti, but still sort of having some elements of letters and shapes that you have in graffiti, and again, like doing walls that are like this, I feel helps strengthen the culture as well as something I like to do. I'm kind of running out of things to say here because everything's similar, but yeah, this is another piece that I did just around the corner from the other one in Fitzroy, and it's fun using the shapes and patterns from the 1960s for me to sort of again create sort of a different sort of a vibe of graffiti, but I've still kind of got my tag up here that sort of brings it back to the raw sort of essence of the sort of art. Like that whole wall was bombed before I touched it, and just everywhere around there is like that, and so I decided to leave a bit of this in the side here, but I guess that, a lot of the essence of the graffiti sort of attitude is to sort of push the freedom to create, and the more freedom there is on a particular spot ups the sort of quality of the work, and having a space where you're allowed to paint with permission, like Avondale Wall, gives it a more of a sense of like a social feeling, like where you can paint with friends, and instead of it being an antisocial thing that's perceived as bad to most of the general public. As well as, again, trying to change the sort of public perception of it. And this is a wall I painted at a primary school on the shore called Bayview Primary. Thanks to Emily over here who's hooked that up for us. And yeah, this is a whole different conversation again, is that artwork commissioned by street artists have a sort of like more of an exciting kind of aspect to them, and that it's not necessarily what you'd want to paint yourself because it's commissioned, but it does help to sort of create a positive thing for youth and for people who are artistically minded to just see where the possibilities can go, and making a living as an artist and being a mentor, and there's a lot of other things that sort of conjures up. I think that's pretty much it. Is there any kind of questions that you want to